In 20th century London, on a quiet street, there stood a seemingly ordinary house. In 1953, while installing equipment in the kitchen wall, a tenant accidentally tore the wallpaper and uncovered a terrifying secret: 3 women's remains curled in the wall space, wrapped in cloth. This discovery rippled through the community like a stone thrown into still water. Police quickly arrived and expanded their search from the kitchen to the entire house. Beneath floorboards and in the backyard soil, they found more victims. The killer was the house's former tenant, John Reginald Halliday Christie. Neighbors described him as mild-mannered and humble, claiming medical knowledge. Yet behind this ordinary appearance hid a cold, cunning, and twisted mind. Christie exploited people's trust and vulnerability, luring women to his home with promises of illegal abortions or other help. He would render them unconscious with gas before strangling them. Shockingly, his crimes extended beyond strangers. He murdered his own wife. Most disturbingly, he framed an innocent tenant for some murders, leading to the wrong man's execution. On April 8, 1899, a couple living near Halifax, West Yorkshire, welcomed their 6th child out of 7, Christie. He had 5 older sisters and 1 younger brother. His childhood was unhappy. Though his father worked as a carpet designer and stayed home often, Christie had a terrible relationship with him. His father was a very strict man who never opened up to family, showed little emotion, and harshly punished minor mistakes. Christie's mother seemed to spoil him but allowed his sisters to bully him. This complicated family environment deeply shaped his personality. On March 24, 1911, Christie's 75-year-old grandfather died at home after long illness. Christie felt no sadness or fear. Instead, seeing his grandfather's body, perhaps due to enduring years of bullying, he felt revenge and happiness. The once intimidating, bad-tempered man now lay still as a cold body on the funeral table, powerless to hurt him anymore. As a teenager, others described Christie as strange. Though he earned a Halifax secondary school scholarship for good grades, he remained solitary and unpopular. Even when singing in church choirs or joining the Boy Scouts later, nobody befriended him. His extreme quietness suggested bottled-up emotions. At 14, he left school and took his first job as a trainee cinema projectionist. Christie struggled with a deeply troubling issue throughout his life. During a date with a girl, he failed to perform sexually, not due to her refusal, but because of erectile dysfunction. Though physically normal, psychological barriers likely caused by years of neglect and bullying from his mother and sisters prevented intimacy. After this incident, he stopped dating and earned cruel nicknames, Reggie No Dick and Cannot Do It Christie. So then he began seeking nighttime street prostitutes for physical needs instead. In September 1916, during World War I, Christie joined the 52nd Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire Regiment as infantry. A year later in France, he transferred to the Duke of Wellington's regiment as signalman. That June, a mustard gas attack injured him. Hospitalized for a month, he later claimed it caused 3.5 years of blindness, muteness, and permanently affected his voice. However, military records showed no eye-throat damage. His hoarse voice possibly stemmed from psychological issues or histrionic personality traits, exaggerating injuries for sympathy. On May 10, 1920, despite ongoing erectile issues, Christie married Ethel Simpson from Bradford at Halifax Register Office, using money stolen from a church collection box. After their marriage, he worked as a letter carrier in the post office. However, he worked hard just to go out on the streets at nighttime, looking for sex workers, something Simpson was well aware of. So, after separating from her husband, she moved to Yorkshire to live with her siblings. Christie frequently stole and sold stamps until his crimes were discovered on April 12, 1921, resulting in a 3-month prison sentence. After release, he remained unchanged. Within months, he received a 1-year sentence for fraud and violent behavior. With his reputation ruined locally, he left Simpson and moved alone to London. But crime remained Christie's first choice for survival. In 1924, he committed 2 thefts, receiving 3-month and 6-month sentences respectively. Later, he became a truck driver, but his violent temper caused dangerous driving. He would chase and verbally attack anyone overtaking him. Within 2 years, Christie received another 6-month sentence for assaulting a pedestrian. He had beaten the victim's head with a cricket bat so severely that prosecutors called it attempted murder. In 1934, he was released from prison, but this time he was arrested for stealing a car, and after his release, he stopped committing crimes, a request made by his wife to stop committing crimes before she would consider reconnecting with him. In 1937, the couple moved into 10 Rillington Street in the London borough of Notting Hill, a dilapidated apartment built in 1870, where the whole building needed to share an outdoor toilet. In 1939, Christie falsified his resume to blend in with the War Reserve Police. At that time, he used his position to seduce Gladys Jones, a colleague in the police department, and started an affair with her. In fact, this woman had a husband who was also an active military man. In 1943, after coming back from the war, when her husband learned that his wife was having a sexual relationship with Christie, and they often stayed together, he was so enraged that he rushed to the house where Jones lived, found Christie, and beat him severely. Another decade followed, the last of which saw him commit multiple burglaries, and this one, from 1943 to 1953, saw him embark on a career of murder. 21-year-old Austrian worker Ruth Forrest was in dire straits and would often subsidize her household by engaging in sex work. She had long been soliciting clients for sex work in a snack bar in Ladbroke Grove, London, and on that occasion she met Christie, a seemingly refined man, who asked Forrest to come to his house for sexual services, because his wife had gone home to visit her relatives. Forced to come to his home for sexual services, the young girl agreed. However, this trip was never heard from again, because after having sex, Christie directly strangled her with a rope on the bed. Then he stored Forrest's body under the floor of the living room, but due to the fear that the smell emitted from the body will be smelled, so the next day, he buried the Forrest's body was buried in the back garden. Shortly after the murder, Christie resigned from his job as a reserve police officer, and then he found a job as a clerk in a factory, where he met his second victim, a female colleague, 32-year-old Muriel Amelia Eady, who had suffered from bronchitis for a long time. And on October 7, 1944, Christie invited her to come with him to his apartment. To go to his apartment with him, where he told her that he had made a special mixture that would cure her bronchitis, which was, in fact, only a friar's balsam that masked the odor. But unbeknownst to her, she continued to inhale gas from a pipe connected to the gas tap until she passed out from gas poisoning. And then Christie sexually assaulted and strangled her, burying both her body and that of his first victim in the back garden. During Easter 1948, Timothy Evans and his wife Beryl moved into the dilapidated apartment. That October, Beryl gave birth to their daughter Geraldine there. In late 1949, Timothy suddenly reported his wife's death to police. Initial searches found nothing, but later investigations revealed 3 bodies in the outdoor washhouse: Beryl, Geraldine, and a 16-week male fetus. Beryl's body was wrapped in blankets and tablecloths. Autopsy reports showed both mother and daughter had been strangled, with Beryl sustaining facial bruises from physical assault before death. Timothy claimed Christie killed his wife during a botched abortion, but after police interrogation, he unexpectedly confessed to murder, though his statement contained suspicious elements suggesting possible fabrication, but this didn't affect the case outcome. On January 11, 1950, Timothy was tried for the murder of his daughter Geraldine. The police did not pursue him for the murder of his wife. At that time, Christie appeared before the police as a suspect accused by Timothy and became the police's main witness. He first denied Timothy's accusations against him and then gave detailed evidence about Timothy and Beryl having an altercation. Despite counsel providing information about Christie's record of burglary and violent crimes, arguing that he should not have been a witness, the jury found Timothy guilty. After he was sentenced to be hanged, he appealed and once again lost, and he was eventually executed by hanging on March 9, 1950, at Pentonville Crown Prison. The police made multiple serious mistakes in their handling of this case, and these mistakes ultimately led to Timothy's wrongful death. Firstly, they failed to carry out a thorough and careful search of the crime scene. It was later discovered that one of the victim's femurs was even supporting the fence in the back garden. The item was very small, yet they did not excavate it during their search. Christie later admitted that shortly after the police search, his dog found Edie's skull in the garden. Had they carried out a thorough search, he would definitely have been arrested earlier before he could go ahead with further killings. In addition, the police mishandled Timothy's interrogation. When he was shown his wife's and baby's clothes, they informed him straight away that they had been found in the laundry. This was information that should have been withheld to force him to disclose where the bodies were hidden. His confession also contained a number of dubious words and phrases that seemed too high-flown for an uneducated, working-class young man like him, which may well have been fabricated. Without much scrutiny, the police readily accepted all of Christie's statements and used him as a key witness. Although Christie had been a reserve police officer, they took him completely at his word, accepting his statements at face value and not carrying out any further investigations into the veracity of his words. They also overlooked the fact that Christie had a criminal record for burglary and malicious wounding, while Timothy had no prior violent offenses. Post-trial, Christie's life returns to normal and he finds a job as a clerk with British Road Services. Meanwhile, the new tenants of the apartment are mostly immigrants from the West Indies. Christie and his wife have strong racist prejudices against these new neighbors and do not like to live with them. Christie's wife prosecutes one of the neighbors for assault, and tensions between the two sides escalate further. Christie then negotiates with the Lawyers' Center to enable him to continue to have exclusive use of the back garden, ostensibly to distance himself from his neighbors, but more likely to prevent anyone from discovering the human remains buried in the garden. On December 6, 1952, Christie quit his job and began selling household items to survive. 8 days later, he strangled his wife in bed. Her last public sighting had been 2 days prior. To hide her disappearance, he invented multiple stories, telling Sheffield relatives she had rheumatism preventing letter writing, informing one neighbor she visited Sheffield relatives, and telling another she went to Birmingham. On December 17th, he sold Simpson's wedding ring and watch. By January 8, 1953, he sold furniture while collecting unemployment benefits. On January 26th, he forged her signature to empty her bank account. By February 27th, he'd sold her clothing. Between January 19th and March 6th, Christie murdered 3 women, Kathleen Maloney, Rita Nelson, and Hectorina McLennan. Kathleen was a sex worker from the Ladbroke Grove area. Nelson was from Belfast and was Ladbroke Grove visiting her sister and was also 6 months pregnant, and McLennan was living in a cafe in London. He met these women repeatedly to build trust before luring them to his flat. Upgrading his gas method, he now used rubber tubing connected to the kitchen gas pipe, sealed with a bulldog clip. After seating victims in the kitchen, he'd release the clip to flood the room with gas. When unconscious, he strangled them with rope. After killing, he placed vests or cloth between their legs, wrapped their half-naked bodies in blankets, then concealed them in a kitchen wall cavity later covered with wallpaper. On March 20th, Christie fraudulently sublet his room to a couple. When the landlord visited that evening and found them instead of Christie, he ordered them to leave by next day. The landlord then allowed another tenant to use Christie's kitchen. On March 24th, while installing a radio bracket on the kitchen wall, this tenant accidentally discovered 3 bodies hidden behind wall panels. Confirming they were human remains, he immediately alerted police, triggering a citywide manhunt. After fleeing the flat, Christie booked a 7-day stay at Roten House in King's Cross using his real name and address. He stayed only 4 days, hastily departing on March 24th upon learning of the body discovery. He wandered the streets afterwards, spending days in cafes, cinemas, sleeping rough at night. On March 31st morning, officers arrested him near Putney Bridge Embankment. A search revealed an old newspaper clipping about Timothy's remand hearing. During interrogation, Christie initially admitted only to the kitchen wall murders and his wife's killing. When shown garden skeletons, he confessed those too. On April 27th, he admitted murdering Beryl Evans, though persistently denied killing her daughter Geraldine. However, his conversation hinted possible involvement. Experts speculate he avoided confessing Geraldine's murder to plead insanity at trial, fearing jury hatred and prisoner retaliation if convicted. On June 5th, he confessed to Edie and Fuerst's murders, helping police identify their remains. Ultimately, he stood trial only for his wife's murder. Proceedings began June 22nd at the same court where Timothy had been tried 3 years prior. Christie repeatedly claimed insanity during trial, with his lawyer arguing he was mad with fragmented memories. Then a Brixton prison doctor assessed Christie as a prosecution witness. Using contemporary medical terms, he testified Christie had hysterical personality but wasn't legally insane. Then the jury rejected his insanity plea, convicting him after 85 minutes deliberation, and the judge sentenced Christie to death. On June 29th, Christie declared he wouldn't appeal his conviction. On July 2nd, Timothy's mother wrote to him demanding full confession to prove her son's innocence. A member of Parliament spent 45 minutes speaking with Christie on July 8th. The next day, He underwent murder case questioning. By July 12, the Home Secretary found no medical or psychological grounds to grant reprieve. Christie's final visitors in the death cell included former Army friends, the prison governor, and his sister, who all saw him the night before execution. Witnesses described him as resigned to his fate. At 9 a.m. on July 15, 1953, Christie was hanged at HMP Pentonville by the same executioner who had killed Timothy. As the noose was placed, Christie complained about an itchy nose. The hangman replied, "It won't trouble you for long." His body was buried in an unmarked grave within prison grounds, standard British practice for executed prisoners.